through the years preceding the collapse of the Soviet Union? Anybody? Well, in the Soviet Union, big difference. So, those of you who have lived through those years certainly remember the name of Dr. Migranyan coming as a leader of thought and the person who could foresee what happened years after. So it's the living classic here in front of you, and I'm very happy that. Well, again, that's why I asked if you lived in the Soviet Union at that time. For us, the media, the thick journals, the newspaper Izvestia, that was like a breath of fresh air, bringing the discourse that was not formed and could not be formed during the Soviet time. And so the years of glasnost, when the new names against thought leaders were appearing, some were in politics in the parliament, some were giving the banks of the river of this new discourse, and Dr. Migranyan is one of them. And I'm very, very happy that we can start our fall 2013 lecture series that is sponsored by Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Graduate Studies Initiative, Graduate Russian Studies Initiative, and to have Dr. Migranyan give this first presentation. In fact, this is his third presentation. The blessing of the Monterey Institute is that we can have lectures delivered in Russian with our students interacting with our guest speakers in Russian. And so Dr. Migranyan just finished his second lecture in Russian that was attended by the officers of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency group who study Russian 7 hours a day at Defense Language Institute. And I was a little nervous sitting at that presentation. The conversation was about the post-Soviet space. Yeah, I was nervous and happy and thrilled because we live in the atmosphere of academic freedom, and when I ask questions about Georgia, I can see our guests tensing up a little bit because the discourse that they've heard for years can be very different from what they've heard this morning at that presentation. So the world is complex, as we know. We sometimes spend too much time reading Western media and believing that's the only way things are, and that's the only point of view that exists. And I'm very pleased to introduce the scholar and a very active member of the political establishment that determined the course of development of New Russia. And I asked Dr. Migranyan today to talk about, and our conversation, the planning took place before the cancellation of President Obama's participation in the summit, before the escalation of the Syrian crisis. So we agreed that Dr. Migranyan will be speaking about the domestic sources of Russian-America's policy, and so we will try to stick to that general topic, but certainly it would be nice if Dr. Migranyan could enlighten us a bit on not just the driving forces behind Putin's America policy, but Russian foreign policy in general and Russian relations with European Union and so on and so forth. So let's work in the about 40-minute format presentation and then Q&A. I know that questions usually are very interesting, and so let's finish our seminar at about 1:45 so that students could come in and for the next class at 2 o'clock. And because he was speaking for 2 hours while standing. So
thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a bit now strange after 2 lectures in Russian to speak in English. I felt myself so comfortable speaking Russian that I'll try to be adjusted to new language, which is not that new for me, but again, I'm not commanding English as I would like to command. I would like to start with a joke that, as Anna mentioned, though Obama cancelled his summit with Putin, but Jon Stewart and his Daily Show organized this summit, and I represented Putin over there, and Samantha B. Obama. Yesterday on Daily Show we had these hot talks on 3 very big topics. Might be they're going to be raised during their meeting: anti-gay propaganda, Syria, and Snowden. But I think you can have fun if you had a chance to look at that, or might be later on you can do that. Anyway, I would like to start, that topic is very big, and by the way, when we are talking about internal sources for Russian foreign policy, it usually put every Russian analyst and even Russian politician in a hard position. Being a long-time member of President Yeltsin's Presidential Council, being an insider in Russian politics, for a long time being senior advisor to the Committee on Foreign Relations of Supreme Soviet, being chief expert of the Committee on CIS problems, and being member of number of very important and highly positioned foreign policy institutions like Defense and Council on Foreign Policy and the Defense organization. Might be some people heard the name of Karaganov and of this organization, and the Valdai Club. Very often we raise the problem how in Russia foreign policy decisions are being made, and usually never ever we came to any definite conclusion how it's happening. Though, as I said, I was involved all the time, even under Yeltsin. I initiated the organization of a structure in administration which is now called Foreign Department on Foreign Policy, which is under Ushakov, the principal aide on foreign policy of the president. And this department was under Rurikov, when Rurikov was the aide of the president, then Prihodko, then Yastrzemsky. But the problem is that unlike the US, Russia doesn't have a really acting institution like your National Security Council, which is the place which itself has a very serious specialist. It's a coordinating structure. President and National Security Advisor are. National Security Advisor is one of the principal participants of the process of decision making. In Russia, you don't have this. In Russia, in Soviet Union, we had something like this, like your Security Council structure, which I think in some sense could be international department of central committees, office. It was a huge institution, and you had specialists on every country, every region. And practically these people were recruited from either foreign office or from foreign policy institutions of Academy of Science. But formally these institutions were, the institutes of Academy of Sciences, but in reality they were of course directly working with Central Committee and with the government and with especially party organs. And of course we had at that time this think tank like Institute of Africa, and they were providing Central Committee and Foreign Office their recommendations about Africa. We had Oriental Institute, it was about the Oriental problems, Middle East especially. Far East Institute about China, Japan. We had Institute of США, Canada, USA, Canada, it's about America. And of course we had, and I used to work in many of these places. I worked and I wrote my dissertation in the Institute of США, Canada. After that, I defended my dissertation in the Institute of International Labor Movement. By the way, the director of the institute was the son of your former the chairman of Communist Party, Eugene Denis. Timur Timofeyev was his name when he was Comintern child. He was living in Russia. His father was the leader of Communist Party in this country. After that, I worked the most important institute, which was on top of other institutes. That was IMMO, Institute of World Economy and International Relations. This was a global institution. Head of the institution, especially the founder, Arzumanyan, and after him Nikolai Nikolaevich Inozemtsev. They were members of Central Committee. They had very high-ranking party position, and usually they were writing their recommendation for Politburo, for secretaries of the party on different issues, and they were very active in policy-making process. After the collapse of Soviet Union, unfortunately, Academy of Science practically collapsed. All these institutions, they are in shambles, their life is miserable, their position in intellectual and political environment is close to zero. Unfortunately, look, 20-storied building IMMO, 16 stories they rented in order to get money to survive. That was in 90s, and that's why, by the way, the Academy of Science now in a process of reform, and then the government want to take property from the academy in order scientists must work and do science, and property must be managed by some others. And the same is with the other institutions. In expert area, of course, emerged some new structures like strategic centers, institutes for strategic planning and something like this, but these are very small, tiny, not important institutions and structures. And as I said, a couple of structures only, like Council of Defense and Security and International Relations, Valdai Club, and a couple of others, really they have resources and possibilities to work and to be as a kind of intellectual support for policymakers. On institutional level, still Foreign Office or Ministry of International Relations is a crucial institution which is dealing with foreign policy on an everyday basis. At the same time, the ministry is the coordinator of all political foreign policy activities. And when, even from time to time, they organize the meetings of Security Council, Foreign Office is a principal institution which is providing necessary materials, recommendations, though formally this National Security Advisor is in charge for organization of these meetings. But as I said, National Security institution in Russia is not even close to what you have in your country as an institution, as a principal institution formulating the policy. Because I have several friends who worked in NSC here as special assistants to President on Middle East, on Russia, on Soviet Union, on other affairs, and exactly this is something which reminded me of Soviet times when consultants in Central Committee worked very close to secretaries and for Politburo and were very influential at that period. The crucial decision maker on foreign policy in as well as on internal politics, but especially on foreign policy, is the acting president. And especially it's true concerning President Putin. Because under Yeltsin, situation was different, and practically at that time we didn't have a real foreign policy, because country came out from the shambles of the collapsed Soviet Union. Institutions were very weak, country was very weak, very poor, very dependent, and a lot of people considered Russia at that time as a country with limited sovereignty. And even there was a joke that Russia's foreign ministry was a Department of State Department, because we had Kozyrev, who usually said that we don't have any differences in our interest with the United States, our goals are coinciding, that's why we belong to the same family, to the same group, we have the same blood, we are liberals, Democrats, we are promoting democracy, and all these naive ideas once proposed right before that by Frank Fukuyama and others, the end of history, the overwhelming victory of liberalism and the promotion of liberalism all over the world, and Russia as a part of Western world. And there was not even a problem whether Russia is junior partner, junior brother, or nobody cared about that, because we overthrew communism, we are now liberals, we are Democrats, we must be in NATO, we must be with Western countries, and we now are building a new society and a new world. This was very naive, of course, and for professionals that was evident even at that time. But our young reformers, they really believed that Russia doesn't have any specific interests, and always Russian and American interests are going to coincide. But you know, big countries usually have their own very specific interests, and these interests are very often conflicting with the interests of other big countries. But the situation is very interesting, and I would like to try to show what was the situation, what options this country had at that time, in what shape was Russia, then what happened, and how our relations evaluated. First of all, I would like to answer to the question, because a lot of people are raising the question, who win and who lose the Cold War, and what happened with the Soviet Union. And even recently we had this seminar in Washington, and there was a kind of very heated debate between Russian representative and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Russian representatives, they were trying to tell that nobody win, there is no winner of the Cold War, both sides became the winners because communism was, overthrown, the new democracy established in former Soviet camp, Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, everywhere. But of course, Brzezinski's position was that Russia lost, Soviet Union lost the Cold War, and Westerners are winners. Why this problem is important? It's important psychologically because when you are giving right answer to this question, then you can have more adequate approach to Russian-American relations. Because if in Washington some people really think that they won the war and defeated the Soviet Union, it means that you can behave and treat defeated country as defeated country. But the problem is, and this is my position, and this is deeply convicted now among all Russians, Soviet Union didn't lose the Cold War. Soviet Union committed suicide because no bullet was shot. Global superpower couldn't lose the war. Having this, I remember academician Utkin told me once during our hearings, he said, listen, until my rockets are on the base, you can behave yourself, you can bully, you can do anything you want to do, because this rockets SS-18, Satana, might be, you remember that, this разделяющие заголовки.
Multiple independent rearmament.
He said, if they are there, don't worry, you are protected and you are absolutely secure. Which means the problem is that there is a psychological problem for Washington policymakers. If we defeated Germany, we defeated Japan, and we gave them a prescription. Do this, do that, and they follow these prescriptions. But the Russians are crazy. They are not following what we are telling them, but because Russians don't think that they were defeated. Because nobody defeated them, nobody liberated them from communists, from totalitarian regime. Russians liberated themselves. Russia, and liberated Eastern Europe, and liberated, and even they did more. They just destroyed their own country. This is the reality. That's why the idea, nobody psychologically has this idea that they are a defeated nation. That's why this is the first and the most important conflict between the perception of Washington policymakers and Russian policymakers. Except a short period of these liberals who were in power in Russia, when they were thinking that Marshall Plan is coming, Russia has no interest, specifically, and Russia is always together with America, Western Europe, everywhere. This short period passed, and there was a clear idea that nobody is going really to provide neither Marshall Plan, nobody is trying even to take Russia seriously, neither as a partner nor as a respected member of international community. And at this moment, before American administration, were three options. And I recently thought about that, and might be I'm going to develop a special article on this issue. One option was that Soviet Union collapsed. It's the time just to use this opportunity. Russia is in shambles, no real state institutions, country is been ruined, centrifugal tendencies are very strong, and one option could be just write off Russia, just to stimulate the process of further disintegration of Russia. Once, by the way, this idea was in Napoleon's mind concerning Prussia. Can you imagine if he was an idea just to delete Prussia as a country from the map of Europe, just to destroy, to divide, to eliminate. And this was an option for Russia because, we had Ural Republic, we had all autonomous or semi-autonomous republics, we had Tatarstan who declared its independence, Chechnya its independence. If this process could be stimulated, might be this process of further disintegration could be an option. But of course there was one problem, which Bush Sr. turned to be a great foreign policy president, together with his team, Baker and Scowcroft. There was the necessity to handle the problem of nuclear weapons. And of course there was a danger that further pushing forward this process of disintegration could bring to an unintended consequences. Who could grab these nuclear weapons? 30,000 nuclear warheads were in Russia at that period. Then there were nuclear weapons in Kazakhstan, nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It was necessary not to promote the process of proliferation. Here Bill is sitting, he knows that much better than I do. And that's why it might be for the administration, for Bush and especially for Clinton, this was a bit dangerous to go that far in order to promote the further disintegration. Second option was the option, by the way, which is considered by many very serious analysts in this country. Among them, I would like to mention Mike Mandelbaum and a lot of realists. There was an option to try to integrate Russia into existing Western military and economic and political institutions, as Americans did with Germany and Japan, to make Russia an integrated part of Western society, really to make serious investments in economy, in modernization of the state. And by the way, I was amazed that a year ago, I think, might be a bit more, but you can check it. Russian Forbes published an article written by Piotr Aven. You know, Piotr Aven now is a billionaire, one of co-owners of Alpha Group and Alpha, the head of Alpha Bank. The guy who was in first Gaidar government, he was in charge for foreign economic relations. I was amazed this a kind of exhibitionist article showing how naive and how far off the reality were these guys at that time when they were in power. He made an interview with Baker and published this interview about the events which happened more than 20 years ago, in '92, when Baker came to Moscow, and these young reformers wanted to see him. They had a brief meeting, but they wanted again to see him, but they were very offended that Baker preferred to go to see Gorbachev rather than to see these young guys. And Aven is writing that in 20 years they met, and he is asking the question to Baker, why you did this kind of thing? We believed you. We wanted Marshall Plan, if not Marshall Plan, but at least $3-5 billion, which could save our government. Our reforms could be smoother, situation would be much better, and we could deal with our internal problems. Yeltsin would be in a better shape, and everything in Russia could develop in another direction. And it's very strange that he dared to publish this, because Baker's answers, his answers, they don't leave any unclarity and uncertainty what really happened. And Baker said, listen, never ever during Perestroika period, or even after the collapse of Soviet Union, there was on the agenda of American foreign policy any idea of Marshall Plan, heavy involvement of America in rebuilding Russian economy, Russian society, institutions. We couldn't sell that to our population because Soviet Union was mortal enemy for many decades, and we couldn't explain why we are massively helping this country after the collapse of Soviet Union. And he said, Aven is asking, listen, you gave so much money to Mexico to save Mexican peso, to save their economy and all this kind of... If you gave us a couple of billions, we could survive, and this liberalism could survive, situation would be different. But Baker, even after 20 years, he told the guy that they were absolute idiots. They didn't have any clue what's going on in Washington, and nobody really wanted to do anything serious in order to save Russia or to help Russia or really to make significant changes in Russia. And what was the option which was chosen by American administration? And now, by the way, more and more Clinton administration is under the criticism of choosing this kind of half-hearted option dealing with Russia. Neither to write off nor to integrate, but to insult Russia, to keep weak Russia, dependent Russia, and to take advantage of weakness of Russia. which, according to some analysts, could be comparable to the situation after First World War, when Allies, Entente countries did with Germany, keeping out of the Western institutions, harsh and tough measures, reparations, and humiliation, and all these kind of things. As a result, but this was very short-sighted and not well thought through strategy, and now many American serious analysts are, in favor of this position. That this was a very serious mistake made by Clinton administration. Either you have to eliminate the country, you don't like it, but half-heartedly to try this huge country to keep in your embraces, trying to keep in weak, dependent situation, it's a very hard thing to do, and you can't handle that for a long time. You could do that for some time, and I hope that many of you, if you are interested in Russian-American relations, you read Russia's Hand. It's called Strop Talbot's book. It's in Russian, called Bill and Boris, about the foreign policy of Clinton and Boris Yeltsin, when really this was the situation when Yeltsin was hanging around begging for money and for political support from Washington, and really country was very much dependent, and Russia was asking the help from International Monetary Fund or World Bank in order to have some money in the budget and to spend some money on social and other needs. And Russian debt was multiplying, and by the period when Putin came to power, Russia's state debt was about $130 or $150 billion. And the burden, unbearable burden to shoulder. And at this period, instead of really using this atmosphere and spirit in Russia as a witness, as a first-hand witness, I must tell you, the ardent desire, like the Westerners, like Americans, to be together with them. We are the same. We overthrow the communism. We want modernism. We want this. We want that. But what got Russia as a result? NATO expansion, practically zero or close to zero serious help in economy, in investments, in some other things. Only, some technical help when money, a lot of money, went not to Russian, specialists or some entities, but American specialists who were coming, living in good hotels, having a good per diem, money for use, and giving some advices. And this was an attempt to try to use Russia's weakness at that moment in order to integrate as much as Soviet heritage was left after the collapse of Soviet Union. Very quickly integrate Eastern Europe into NATO and EU. Then after that, former Soviet republics. And, at that time, I remember in '92, today during my Russian lecture, I said in '92 I wrote an article which was called, then in American literature, Migranyan's Monroe Doctrine, that post-Soviet space is the area of Russia's vital interest. In a year after that, Brzezinski in Foreign Affairs published an article which was called the aim of America's foreign policy must be the creation of geopolitical plurality in post-Soviet space, which means Ukraine, other centers vis-à-vis Russia, against Russia. several centers in order not let Russia to integrate this space, which means Russians didn't feel that really their desire to be part of the West was met by the West adequately. And that's why when in Washington we have again this discussion with Professor Brzezinski, and he said, listen, you Russians have to decide with whom you are. America is going to create this united economic space with Europe. It's a huge entity. Russia is going to be either isolated or Russia has to embrace China as a junior partner. But I think for you it's much better to be together with the West rather than to the East or to the China. And to this I said, listen, Professor, it seems to me that you are talking as though you just fall from the moon. You know that after the collapse of Soviet Union, Russia applied for NATO membership. Russia applied for membership of all these European institutions. Instead of that, Russia was treated very derogatory, very humiliatory fashion. Western countries tried always to say that Russia is not Europe, Russia must be somewhere over there. And Eastern Europe were involved here, two phases of NATO enlargement, and then on the agenda was in Bucharest in 2007, that was in 2008, the problem of Georgia's and Ukraine's accession into the NATO. And you are talking that Russia doesn't want to be the West? Russia wants to be with the West, but Russia doesn't want to be, on the conditions of Brussels and Washington when they just don't take into account any interest of Russia. Russia wants to be part of the Europe and the West as a respected, sovereign country whose interests are taken seriously. But if you are ignoring, you are not taking the interest seriously, you are pushing Russia into the embraces of China. Recently in, I think, New York Times or somewhere, Dmitry Sams with Leslie Gill, they wrote an article about Russia's-Chinese relations, and he reminded some Americans who are not very familiar with history, because usually Chadaev joked that Russians don't have the sense of history. Every day they start from a blank list, and that's why they are doomed to make the same mistakes. But this country is very close to Russia in this sense. No sense of history, and everybody thinks that they started the history and they are making the history. The problem is that even when some short-time alliances, they changed radically world history. And they reminded the Russian-German very short-time alliance, which enabled Bismarck to destroy France and create the huge German state, which then became the cause of 2 world wars. In this sense, they were warning that, might be in long run Russia and China have a lot of conflicting interests, but in short run, if you are pushing, you don't give any opportunity for a real choice, then you can have unintended consequences of this kind of short-lived alliances, which are quite possible, which means you must be cautious and you must be serious and you must be more respectful towards your partners. Unfortunately, as I said, Clinton's policy towards Russia was half-hearted. It's in Russia, there is a word, not a nice word, but it's a politika shipacza. Shipach, it's a thief, but a little thief who is not So he doesn't have a scale. He just to grab something, to take something here is not laying in a proper way there. Just to grab something until the guy is not alert, is not, controlling the situation. This was not a policy of a great power. Unfortunately, after Reagan, who had a grand foreign policy concept, after Bush elder, who really handled the disintegration of nuclear superpower and Eastern Europe and all the Soviet Union, unfortunately, 3 successive governments in this country, they didn't have a policy, or the policy was, of course, in many cases, just a disaster. I'm not talking about Bush Jr.'s policy. Everybody knows the results. And this Obama's policy, yesterday came out my article on Syria and national interest, and Syria, Egypt, Libya. It's just disaster. And of course, and as I said, Clinton's policy was also. It's a kind of what is happening with the world. The political leaders are becoming smaller. Their scale is smaller, way of thinking smaller. That's why nobody could put forward. Even the country, this great country, which left as a only superpower, deserved to have bigger leaders rather than Clinton, Bush Jr., and current president. Because when you are following the discussion on television, the questions which they were raising, pro and contra, they showed that really, unfortunately, nobody has any idea what are the basic goals and interests, how you are going to pursue, what kind of consequences will be if you are taking these actions or you are not taking these actions, what's going to happen next. Nobody is asking, this is the chess, but not the chess with combinations, but the chess when you only know 2 moves, one and at least second move, but you don't know what's going to happen after your second move. This is unfortunately the reality. But when Bush Jr. came to power, and I remember at that time I had a meeting in Moscow with Condoleezza Rice. She was his senior advisor during the campaign. She was not yet national security advisor, but was the chief advisor during the campaign. She told us that, listen, we are too omnipotent. America is the only superpower. We are going to ignore Security Council, United Nations, multilateralism. We just don't care about our partners, allies, about you. Just forget it. And we are going to carry on unilateral foreign policy. And, unilateralism ended up in a disaster. And at the beginning, though on a personal basis they established good relations with Putin, and by the way, Putin was the first who really, actively involved in American actions against Afghanistan after 9/11, and Russia's contribution was much bigger than any of NATO members. And at that time, by the way, in Russia, there was again a mood that Russia is becoming part of the West, Russia will be part of the NATO, we are together, we are allies. But after Afghan campaign, Washington's policy turned to be again very arrogant, just ignoring Russia and Russia's interest. America withdrew from anti-missile treaty of 1972. America started, and Bush administration started, this anti-missile defense program, which in Moscow everybody considered that this is against Russia's strategic forces. And practically through all these directions, again a new phase of enlargement of NATO, And in Moscow they realized that this is the continuation of the line of Clinton administration, and even in a worse form. But what happened during this period, but Washington just overlooked that. Russia ceased to be the Russia which they knew in 90s, when Russia was in shambles. Drunken, alcoholic president, Russia's president needed in 96 or 93 support of the Westerners in order to repeal the attack of communists. Putin, becoming the president, he consolidated the state power and state institutions. Russia had for many years 7-8% growth. Oil prices went up enormously. Russia became the third biggest, holder of currency reserves after China and Japan. And Russia restored the agency of Russia's power in world affairs. That's why this kind of behavior by inertia and ignoring was creating a serious tensions between these two capitals, though at that time even my friend who is now in New York, senior director in Kissinger Associates, Tom Graham, he was special assistant to Bush on Russia, he said at least one achievement which they had at that time, they established a strategic group of strategic exchange. Some Russian principal officials like head of administration Voloshin, some from Security Council, some others, they from time to time they have meetings with their counterparts as a kind of channel of communications, a lower level than the president's, in order to prepare some recommendations. Of course, nothing really happened, and once I asked him, listen, if they had that kind of good relations, and by the way, President Putin once during our meeting with a small group, he also confessed that on personal level he had really very good relations with Bush. By the way, I remember when I was during the elections in 2004 in San Diego, a teacher in elementary school, a liberal, registered liberal, many generation liberal, he said, of course, I'm going to vote for Kerry, but if I have an extra ticket for a baseball match, I'll invite Bush Jr. rather than Kerry because he's a nice guy. And Putin also felt that this is a good guy, you can deal with him. And I asked, listen, if they had that kind of good relations, why on political level there was this kind of misunderstanding and the relations degraded up to the lowest level, if you remember, when that was the Georgian War, and really the situation was close to zero. And he said, and this is also very important thing to understand in Russian-American relations, he said, the problem is that Bush really liked Putin, but he used to say, Putin is a good guy, but he doesn't understand Russia's interest. As far as in Washington, any politician can think that they understand Russia's interest better than Russian leaders, you never ever can have normal, constructive partnership and relations. This is arrogance, this is condescending approach, this approach leads to nowhere. As a result, Russia together with France and Germany opposed American invasion to Iraq, and history proved that Russia's position was absolutely right. This ended up in disaster. America spent trillions of dollars. Country is in ruins, de facto disintegrated into three parts. Shiites, Sunnis and Kurds region is destabilized up to the, I don't know, up to the end. And now there is a brilliant opportunity to increase the scale of instability over there after attacks of this Nobel Prize winner president who is going to attack because he used to say that if they cross the red line, then we are going to do something. The problem is that might be the height of this relations, or at least the character of these new relations, became more clear during the Munich speech of Putin. And if you remember, in Munich, every year they have a Munich strategic conference on strategic issues. Many leaders are coming there. And Putin made a speech which infuriated all the Western, Western media, Western capitals. Politicians made very harsh, reactions to that. If you don't remember that, if you have read that, just I'll recommend you to read, because I had a comment in Russian newspaper, in one of the Russian newspapers. I'll tell you the title in Russian, then try to translate in a proper English. Putin совершил смертный грех. Он сказал правду. Putin committed a mortal sin. He said the truth. The truth was that America is conducting unilateral policy, is ignoring its allies, ignoring the partners, not taking seriously any objection, and this is not the way of dealing with international relations. Ignoring the Security Council, ignoring the United Nations, ignoring multilateral organizations. But at that time, practically, this was very symbolic, Putin's speech over there, because this was a threshold. Putin wanted to show, and then Western media wrote about that a lot, especially after that in 2008, after Georgian war. Russia is back. Russia was written off. Now Russia is back. Russia is a factor of international politics. Every issue in world politics, if you want to solve, you have to deal with Russia. That's why it was a bit funny when and my friend, former special assistant to President Bush, Tom Graham, recently, last week, he wrote in International Herald Tribune, yeah, fine, Obama cancelled his summit with Putin, but what is raison d'etre? What he is gaining? What is the results? Why? Just somebody can explain why. And then he, not only he cancelled that, yesterday my article came out in National Interest, you can read that, he even attempted to insult Putin. Even during communist period, never secretary generals used any insulting words against American presidents, and never American presidents personally insulted Soviet leaders like Stalin or Khrushchev or others, though, they could do that. But it is the funniest thing. If you are insulting the leader, you are cancelling the meeting, but now, today, in Petersburg, you are going to discuss the problem with Putin about Syria. But listen, you can solve this problem if you are going to solve this in Security Council. Russia is permanent member. Russia has influence in the region. Russia has a lot of other opportunities to be a crucial partner. Why? What is the reason? Why you are behaving like a, and why you are insulting? Why you are, condescending? Why you are humiliating? It's hard to explain. Anyway, this is, I call this a dilettantism in foreign policy. I don't know, it's up to you to assess internal political developments, but on foreign policy, this is total dilettantism. Vis-à-vis Libya, Gaddafi has to go. Vis-à-vis Mubarak in Egypt, Mubarak has to go. Now they have a military dictatorship over there, and it's fine. But Mubarak was bad. But open military dictatorship is good. Or Islamic radicals over there, good. There's no logic. And then everybody is warning that, listen, Islamic radicals and Al-Qaeda are there. Whom you are going? And Senator McCain, if you remember, recently he was in a very peculiar situation. He was shot on one picture with these radicals, and he said, oh, I didn't, and Rand Paul ridiculed him and said, if Senator doesn't know with whom he is on the picture, how we know whom we are going to supply the arms? This is really logical questions which are coming out of this situation. And the problem is, I don't know how. I want to now to just to make a final conclusion. The problem is that Russia really, under Putin, wants to be a partner with the United States and with the West. But Russia wanted to be a partner, not just, somebody whom, who is getting orders. And, during the Bush period, we have this experience. In the Bush administration's position towards the other countries was, we tell you what to do and don't ask questions. Just do what we tell you to do. And during the Georgian War, even there was this kind of very tough conversation between Condoleezza Rice and Sergei Lavrov. When Condoleezza was demanding Lavrov to stop this, to do this, and then Lavrov said, listen, hold on a second. Who you are? You are dictating me what to do and how to do. Who you are? What about you are thinking? What you are thinking about you? And this was this was the last conversation between the two ministers, and fortunately the term ended of that administration, and we really enjoyed some period of optimism when Obama came to power, and we decided that this is a good opportunity really to put an end to the Cold War. Really Russia will be with America solving many problems which are really joint problems. It's terrorism, non-proliferation, it's, missile defense, energy problems, and many others. And it's going to be the era of constructive relations between our two countries. But unfortunately, relations are deteriorating because, we have serious differences on Libya, and as events proved, Russia's position was absolutely right. Libya was among 5 best and more successfully developing countries according to UN statistics. Every year 7-8% growth they had, and they had the highest level in Northern Africa. And this country is now in ruins. And nobody knows armament which they were supplied to these radicals. Where is this armament? Some was in Mali, some might be in Syria, and there is no such country as Libya. It's just no state. The same is in Egypt, the same is in Syria, and we have very serious differences on missile defense. Though Hagel and Kerry said that Americans are stopping the 3rd or the 4th phase of anti-missile defense system, but again, nobody could convince Russians that this missile defense is not targeting Russian strategic missiles. And by the way, it's a funny. On one of the occasions in CSIS, I asked Brzezinski a question. I said, listen, professor, if Americans, every administration, every president, every state secretary, and secretary of defense usually tells that we don't let Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. We don't let. Israel is telling the same. We'll bomb to Stone Age, we don't let them. But at the same time, to Russians, the same people are explaining that this system we are building against Iranian weapons. And Brzezinski's answer was very simple. He said, I'm asking the same question several years and no response. And we didn't get any response. If you are not letting Iran to have nuclear weapons, why you are building anti-missile system against Iranian nuclear weapons? It's just nonsense. Anyway, situation is not easy. As we understood, there was a promising idea that there must not be the old game with zero-sum game as it was in earlier periods when Americans, when siding Eastern Europeans or Baltic states or Georgia or Ukraine, this automatically had anti-Russian dimension. They tried to explain to their partners in Eastern Europe, in former Soviet Union, that we are improving relations with Russia. It doesn't mean at your expense. We have separate relations with them, separate relations with you. And this was a bit promising, but unfortunately the situation is deteriorating. The disagreements on many issues are becoming more and more, but still we have some areas of very close and critical cooperation. As I said, this is Afghanistan, anti-terrorism and non-proliferation, energy problems, and some others. But of course, I think a lot of depends how this situation will develop concerning Syria, how far we can go together or separately. And recently the situation was spoiled by Edward Snowden. Yesterday on Daily Show I explained that this was for Russians unwelcomed guest. This was gift of American government. He cancelled his passport when he was in Moscow. And we didn't want the guy, but the guy decided to stay because he is afraid to come here. He is afraid to get 200 or 300 years in prison. That's why this is his choice. It was not Russia's choice to have Snowden over there. He's a whistleblower, it's your problem, and it was very funny to listen from some loons that Russia must be punished because Snowden applied for asylum in Russia. The problem is that we don't have any agreement with America for extraditing this kind of people, and second, Russia many times applied to extradite the people who were tried and convicted as terrorists on Russian territory, and State Department and American authorities just ignored it. They just didn't respond it. And now they are telling that you have to return back Snowden. Why? In international relations, international relations are the area of jests and symbols. Any country who has a dignity and self-respect is acting reciprocally. You are behaving this way, you can get the same kind of response. Nothing personal, just business. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Garrity, and I'm a teaching foreign language student here. My question is, what internal policies, both in Russia and the U.S., are going to have the most influence over international policy within the next 20 years, in your view?
It's a very good question, and it's very good question and very easy question to answer. Your Secretary of Defense and Joint Chief of Staff Mullen and Gates, they brilliantly formulated that the greatest challenge and for American security is American state debt, which means healthy economy is the basis for healthy and very serious and potent foreign policy, which means everything will depend on what economic situation will be United States and Russia in forthcoming years, because foreign policy is the problem of resources. And today, the resources are shrinking, at least here. Clearly we see the shrinkage because America was involved in state building and nation building and can't handle this because it's too heavy, the burden. Russia stopped to do this kind of adventures, but again, Russia has very serious internal economic problems. Russia would like to have safe and secure environment in international relations in order to diversify Russia's economy. This is the biggest challenge for Russia at this moment.
My name is Ruben Gazarian. I'm in the Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies program. We read a lot in the West about the Sochi Olympics becoming a turning point in terms of Medvedev leaving, in terms of these anti-gay laws coming to fruition. How do you see, or how do you consider Sochi in terms of internal domestic politics in Russia?
Well, I think that this is something crazy happening. I remember I was pretty young. You are now younger, but I was pretty young in 1980. How old I was? 31. Yeah. And I remember the boycott of Moscow Olympics. Moscow Olympics boycott could have some real reason, because at that time Soviet Union was an existential threat to US and to Western world. And invasion, it was not just invasion into Afghanistan. Before that, communists and the left forces had the dominant influence in Europe, practically everywhere. Russia, Soviet Union was in Africa, was in Central America here, and it was a real threat, and this was a very serious event which mobilized Western countries in order to a kind of punish or publicly to show dissatisfaction of Russia's policy. But it's a joke to compare invasion in Afghanistan, this existential threat, and anti-gay law. Nobody knows in this country what is the essence of the law. I am here, even being here, twice I was on television, on NPR, National Public Radio, on this issue, and even I was in Daily Show also on this issue. No anti-gay law we have in Russia. Under Soviet period, same-sex relations were criminal acts. It was sodomia. By the way, in many states in America until now, they have in their books the same law. This is sodomia. When I was in Washington, and Dmitry Sam said, what happened across the river in Virginia? This is still in the books. It's a sodomia. But the only problem which really is in this law is that no propaganda of homosexualism to kids. We need to protect kids from this kind of propaganda. No prosecutions, and I formulated my idea at least, that listen, we left you alone, leave us alone. Don't organize your pride parades. Why the hell you are doing this? In Russia, this is a conservative country, 80% of population, they are anti-gay. And by the way, gays must pray every day to Putin and to government to protect them against these anti-gays who will with great pleasure beat them up
every day if they are going to demonstrate and to manifest. But government in '93 eliminated this article from criminal code. Nobody cares you are gay, lesbian, I don't know, transvestite. It's up to you. But just don't demonstrate and manifest publicly your way of life, and don't impose your way of life as the only right way of life, which is not. And if democracy worth something, if you have 80% of population against, you have to respect them. I know that you have to respect the minority rights, but it doesn't mean to ignore majority's rights. I can understand when this loon Senator Leno in this state, he has might be his constituency, a lot of gays who are pushing him, and he submitted a law to banning the pension funds to invest in Russia. Listen, but Russian parliamentarians, they have also constituency, and the constituency is anti-gay. What happened? That's why I don't think that this is a chantage. But I must tell you, Putin is the guy who is a champion in martial arts, which means in Russian we say он держит удар, он не слабонервный. He can handle this. And the chantage of the gays or gay-oriented journalists or others, it's just, they are just doing worse situation in Russia for their community rather than doing something good. Because, listen, yesterday on radio from Moscow was on show some guy named Andrei. And the host is talking that now we are in gay bar in Moscow, in central Moscow, in the bar, good music, good drinks over there, gays are and lesbians dancing and doing this and that. And then he is interviewing this bartender, Andrei. And Andrei is telling, yeah, it's terrible, it's homophobic, the law, situation now is worse than under Soviets. It's just unbelievable. One must be real lunatic. Gay bar in Moscow under Soviets? Andrei giving interview to American public radio in the center in gay bar? Unbelievable. Russia is freer than ever in its history, and of course all this is just manipulation of mass conscience and brainwashing for the people who didn't have any alternative sources of information. Because in reality, it's very funny to read that if gay sportsmen will come to Sochi, they'll be prosecuted, they will be imprisoned. How anybody could find out you are gay or not gay? Who cares you are gay or not gay? But of course, if you organize parade, if you make some demonstration, manifestation, of course, you will be, very gently, put in some frames, because this is not the way to act. There is an ancient saying, «Делай время, как римляне делают».
Yes, right.
Hi, I'm Brian Lee, and I'm the director of the Eurasia Nonproliferation Program at the Center for Nonproliferation Studies. One of the things I kind of see a lot in the media here is a tendency to dismiss Russia's objections about Syria with the argument that, well, of course Russia is going to dismiss because they have the strategic interest of this port, and it's in their best interest to maintain this cozy relationship with the dictator. So I would ask, first, how would you respond from the sense of Russians' interest to that accusation? And secondly, if you could point to any alternative actions that Russia has taken in order to try to defuse the situation before the weapons of mass destruction attack.
I wrote extensively on this issue. I am a columnist for Izvestia, regularly I'm writing, and regularly writing for National Interest in English. And on this issue, Russia's position is very clear. It has nothing to do with the port Tartus, because it's not even a port, It's some facility, a small facility for refilling or doing some small repair. It's not a base in the sense of base. And it's not that important. Russia's position is very clear, and China is supportive to this position. No regime change from outside. It is Russia's position, because these kind of changes from outside, they are not helping, they are just making worse the situation. First. Second, Russia was not, at many times Putin and Lavrov said, we are not stuck with Bashar al-Assad. We are for negotiated settlement of the problem. But what was the difference between Hillary's position and Lavrov's position? Russia said, we want all involved sides to be at the table to negotiate the mechanism of transition of the power. But America's position was, again, by the way, Patrick Buchanan and many others, they wrote, and even Brzezinski, who was very supportive to Obama, he gave interview to Rossiyskaya Gazeta and said, why the hell Obama said that Assad has to go? Why he said that Mubarak has to go? Gaddafi has to go? There is a red line. You can put condition which is absolutely impossible to implement, because Assad is not just Assad. Assad represents a very large and influential forces inside Syria. He enjoys the support of majority of population first. Alawites specifically, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, Kurds, all want him to be there because they are afraid of Sunnis, radicals, Al-Qaedists, jihadists, and nobody wants them. But Western and Washington's position is Assad has to go. Who would represent the interest of these very serious groups in society? I'm not talking about 300,000 army, well equipped, well trained, and by the way, more than 2 years they are fighting and no defectors. At least majority of army is backing Assad. Why? I am surprised. That's why I wrote, this is not a good word to use, when you are defining the policy, but this is real dilettantism. Somebody has to represent these groups. Hillary said no, that's why Geneva I didn't happen. Now American position is a bit moving in this direction, but situation now went out of control. And I am afraid that now in Moscow the position is that anything is worse than Assad. But even in this country, many analysts on television might be, listen, anybody is worse than Assad. Because these guys are cutting the hearts, eating them before the cameras. And these wild cannibals are hard to come to the power. And you are supporting these guys? Russia's position, again, is Geneva II. Let's have negotiated settlement. And Russia's another position is, okay, you don't want Assad, we don't want Assad. Who is coming after Assad? Nobody is asking this question in this country. These neocons and liberal interventionists in this country, they are like Russian Bolsheviks. You remember the International, the song had a fantastic words, and we usually joked in late Soviet period, мы этот старый мир разрушим до основания, а затем initially will destroy, to the ground everything, and then after. What's going to be after? It's a Bolshevik approach. And this is exactly the approach of this neocon laws.
Hi, my name is Tashpour Abdurrahman. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. I'd like to hear your thought on commonly held belief in my country is that the United States is losing its influence in region to Russia.
It's not that kind of, it's not that clear, as I'll put this way. United States never had in your country a stronger position than Russia. Never, ever. They have some position. And by the way, Bakiev was kicked out because he miscalculated. He decided to joke with Putin. It's not good. Anybody who is joking with Putin, miscalculating, he is ending not in a good place. I don't want to say something about Obama, who made this kind of also not very good jokes or very strange statements. But anyway, Bakiev could be until now the president of Kyrgyzstan if he behaved based on their agreements with Putin. He violated the agreement and he paid the price. And first. Second, United States, they have to leave Afghanistan. And the importance of Manas airport and the base is not that important in this case. And region is becoming secondary in its importance. And even in this sense, being in CSIS, attending one of these seminars on the region, I was even pretty optimistic in sense that if initially Russia was more pushing Americans to leave the region, now might be it is not in Russia's best long-run interest Americans completely to leave the region because of two reasons. First reason, China is coming, and Chinese influence and economic presence is much bigger now in your country, in Kazakhstan, in others, except the only place in Uzbekistan where Russia's position still is stronger than Chinese in economic sense. And of course Islamic radicals and the Taliban, and we would like to have America over there, but this is my position. I didn't, I don't know what is the formally, as in Foreign Office my friends told me, formally Foreign Office's position is that no American base, no foreign base in the region. But in reality, I think that Americans, as a part of a balance, they'll be more useful over there in a time being.
I'm Louis. I'm also in non-proliferation studies. I just want to ask about the past. You mentioned that after then in the Soviet Union, there were a lot of international organizations which Russia joined, but they never joined OPEC. Why, in your opinion?
Russia doesn't care OPEC because Russia is the biggest producer of oil. Russia wants to have free hands and to have a maneuver. Why he has to follow some regulations and some rules which are, putting together several countries. It's usually always hard to come to consensus when several people are. Why Americans don't want to go to UN or to Security Council? Because when they were very strong, they said, we are too strong to go to discuss with others our problems. We can make decisions for ourselves. Russia can make its decision by itself, just ignoring OPEC. Or Russia is cooperating with OPEC, but just there is no need for Russia to be part of OPEC.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. In one of your articles on the reset, you said that there's this idea that the reset had run its course, but that's kind of a funny thing to say because the definition of the reset was never really agreed upon, and that there were different interpretations in Moscow and in Washington. And I was wondering if you could talk more about the different interpretations.
Oh, that's true. What was Russia's perception of reset? Russia's perception of reset was that we faced under Bush Jr. Arrogant, unilateral policy in the world, ignoring not only partners but even allies, and no readiness for any dialogue, not taking seriously the interests of anybody in the world. And in this sense, Obama's administration's pivot in this sense was just from this unilateralism to multilateralism, from monologue to dialogue, which means American side had to normalize the situation, which means Moscow looked at Washington and considered that Washington's policy is not normal. And by the way, this shift of Obama's administration was not just because, the doves came, they wanted to do this, but this was also necessity. You can be involved in nation building and state building in Afghanistan, in Iraq, to go to endless wars in other places. Your resources are shrinking, your opportunities are becoming smaller and smaller. You need to create alliances, to work with partners, to take into account interests, which meant this was this kind of perception in Moscow. But some loans in Washington decided that reset is unilateral concessions to Russia, which is not the case. Because what happened? Obama said that, we'll stop building this RLS in Czechia, will not deploy these anti-missiles in Poland. We have to sign arms reduction treaty with Russia. And they wanted to sell this as big concessions on behalf of Washington to Moscow. Moscow doesn't perceive this way these events. First of all, nobody cancelled anti-missile defense program. It's going on, but redeployed and relocated the sites, and it's in a process. And Americans are not ready to sign binding treaty that it's not targeting Russia. First. Second, arms reduction treaty. All American state secretaries alive and security advisors all wrote a letter to the president that this is in favor of United States and they need this treaty. And Romney was ridiculed by everybody when he published a stupid article that this is dangerous for America, American defense, and all these kind of stupid things. And when I was in the Senate, in Senator Kyle's office, Senator Kyle was one of the opponents of ratification. I said, Senator, do you have any problem with this treaty and with the Russia? He said, neither with Russia nor with treaty I have no problem. I have problems with this administration. I said, what is your problem? I want them to give money to Arizona nuclear laboratories and some other armament, programs, after which I'm going to vote for the ratification. I don't think that this treaty has anything dangerous for America. It's in our favor, but we need money for our, nuclear and other facilities and laboratories. which means this was two perceptions, different kind of perceptions. And when we were, by the way, in Valdai Club, former assistant, I think, Deputy Assistant Secretary Toby Gatti, or some others, I don't remember, they were asking to Putin, okay, on American side, we said means this. What is on Russian side, the reset? And Putin was surprised. What do you expect? As though Russia is pushing forward, CSTO on Canada, deploying anti-missile defense in Mexico, or in Cuba once that was under Khrushchev, or we are enlarging, our military installations. Russia is in defensive. Russia just needs a dialogue, and that's it. What can Russia change in its position vis-à-vis America? Russia's position is very clear, and this is the leitmotif which I endlessly repeat. Russia needs just understanding. Russia doesn't need support, I don't know, this or that, just understanding. Because so distorted is perception of Russia's position, Russia's role, Russia's actions. Because all information which you read here in American media and Western media, this is the information. If you are reading about gays, this information is coming from the gay community of Russia, which means you can trust information which is biased. It is in advance biased. But nobody is telling you that this is from gay sources. If you are reading that liberals are in trouble, in disaster, this information is coming from liberal circles. If you are reading all this, which means you don't have an opportunity to check it, to compare it. Or I hope you have this opportunity because you are specialist, you are reading wider, deeper. That average person, unfortunately, doesn't have this opportunity. They are listening some idiots, they are reading some distorted information, and they believe that because they don't have any alternative sources. And you can put in every corner Andranik Migranyan to explain them what's really happening in Russia.
Well, perhaps that would be the way to finish it. We know Dr. Migranyan said himself that for decades he thought those who deal with disarmament issues, the weapons issues, will always have jobs. So our students will, even those who
that's
deal
true.
with
Under Soviet period,
just
we were very envious to people who were in disarmament, because usually they were telling us that we have the best jobs, we have the best komandirovki, which means Vienna and Geneva, the best places, very good per diems, and they were the aristocracy among diplomats.
So now we need to make Russia special. It's the aristocracy of the diplomat, and that means a lot of work to try to understand. But thank you. It's certainly very tough.